Next up, we're going to talk about the new Asian tigers. We're going to learn about the Chinese startup ecosystem. You know, China has been really a fascinating place for all of us to watch. And we have Vani Kola, who's a dear friend who used to be with us in the Bay Area. She was a good friend of ours in the Bay Area and ran a successful startup. Then she came over to India and has again now reinvented herself and is running a successful venture capital company. And so I think she really has put together a great panel that almost did not make it to Bangalore because of certain challenges, I guess, with the visas. So we're very, very happy really to have Vani come up here, introduce her two panelists, and really get into the new Asian tigers. Vani, come on up.
You know, when you have worked for as long as I have, there are a lot of memories, and I want to start out not as relevant to this panel, but you know, MR, who just introduced, played such an important role and many incidents, but he may remember or not, but I think MR started this whole mentoring, mentor capital, something like that, right? In the beginning, names changed, but I think he played such a seminal role in mentoring so many entrepreneurs and doing that from the background and, you know, sharing the joy of seeing them succeed. And I think one of the most important things that needs to continue to happen for Indian ecosystem is that process of continuous learning, paying forward, sharing backwards, and creating that strong mentor group. So I want to take that opportunity to thank you, MR, for all the mentoring that you did to me and to many other entrepreneurs many years ago and continue to do. As we go off into the panel, you know, as a VC, when I think of China, the first things that come to mind are massive companies, multi-trillion-dollar tech economy they have nurtured, and you know, names that are universal: Xiaomi, Alibaba, Tencent, WeChat, product brands, and so on and so forth. The question, though, is how did they create such a massive success and scale? And that's what we kind of want to explore in this session. And I think the amount of capital that has been invested by venture capital in China is unprecedented. And you know, in a way, they say imitation is the sincerest form of flattery, but it's also one of the quickest ways to learn. So why not? So this session is about learning from China's growth. But before I introduce my panelists, I just kind of want to run through a few thoughts quickly. And we are all technologists, but let me figure out how the clicker works from a slide. Demo, where is which? But didn't work. Okay, so just very quickly to recap, right? Lots of similarities between China and India. So hence, you know, people say India is like 2003 in China. The success of China is right behind India is right behind where success of China is. And those are some of the questions we are going to explore. But if we look at where we are trending from liberalization of India to China and the similarities we have, maybe it's right that, you know, decade or so, hopefully India will be where China is. And, you know, continuing to talk about similarities, the stark contrast is why is it that in the last decade we have had only 21 IPOs and, you know, a small percentage of what China has been able to achieve. And the velocity of Chinese startups just is staggering, whether you look at number of products sold, size of companies, and the total value created by single platform. So there is sort of a dominance mindset to Chinese entrepreneurs. We are not yet fulfilled in India. Obviously, all of these names and more we know and track. And just lastly, I think in terms of differences and similarities, where India ranks today, is it how far are we from catching up? But the good news is from 2006 to 2016, there hasn't been another time that I can recall where India has grown so fast, and the energy and the ecosystem and the maturity of entrepreneurial fervor is unprecedented. So actually, having been on the ring side from 2006, from my perspective, there has been tremendous change in entrepreneurial mindset, venture capitalist mindset. And talking about venture capital, I loved my friend, Naveen, trying to be balanced about the role of venture capitalists. I really don't know why we get such a bad rap, but I just thought I would share this. I went to China first time in May, and somebody explained to me the translation of how venture capitalist is said in China really means throwing capital into the winds, and I thought that was funny, but I think that's not all what we do. With that, what I'd like to do is to invite my co-panelists. I can't think of two better people who can lead us through this discussion, Tuck Ko and Ho-Yin Lee. Tuck is founder, please join me on the stage. Tuck is founding partner of Shunwei Capital, one of the best known venture capitalists in China. Shunwei manages over $2 billion and is successful in spanning everything from IoT, e-commerce, online education, and one of the investors in Xiaomi as well. And Ho-Yin is managing director at Citi, has worked both in North America and Asia. Citi Group has led some of the best IPOs in China, most notably that of Alibaba and others a few years ago. And I'm Vani Kola, founder of and MD at Kalaari Capital. And today we want to have a dialogue along with you on what can we learn from China's successes, what are the similarities, what are the differences. So. So Tuck, maybe just starting with you, right, and sharing your learnings and the process of how you have seen some of these companies get this, great scale that we have seen in China. Love to hear your thoughts.
Sure. Maybe just a more background information about myself and my firm. I'm Singaporean, and I moved to China back in 2003. Our firm was founded in 2011, and today we manage about $2 billion in funds under management. So I think Vani made a very good summary of the similarities and differences between China and India. I made my first trip to India last year, and for several reasons. I think one of the reasons why Chinese investors started looking at India, so I'm not alone, there are a few other people. So one of the reasons is because investors are looking at the next big market after China. And in conjunction with that, over the course of the past 1 year or so, I have received visitors from India. These were founders from startups, Indian startups, as well as venture capitalists from India visiting China. And after my first few trips to India, I found it very interesting because I could see some similarities of Indian startups and similar to what I saw in China maybe 5 to 10 years ago. I think for between the two countries, there is obviously a lot of similarities. Both are vast countries with large population and densely populated cities. However, there are also a lot of differences. One key difference I noticed between India and China is that in China, there is a language that every Chinese understands, which is Mandarin. So a startup that built a product for the Chinese market, this product can technically reach 1.4 billion people. Whereas, to my surprise, after my first few trips to India, one of the very large Indian internet startups that I heard of had for a long time only developed an English version of their mobile app. And that's just reaching more than 100 million people. So I think that's a big difference in the two markets, which makes China maybe a more uniform market than India. And as I thought about why is Chinese startups, why have they grown some of them, why have they grown so big today? I think there are several reasons. One reason, not in any order of importance, one reason is that the Chinese economy as a whole has had enjoyed very high growth for the past few decades. And which is, if you, maybe just to explain the background of our name, Shunwei. Shunwei is essentially a short form for 顺势而为, which a translation will be leveraging on a big trend. So the Chinese economy for the past few decades having a very high growth is a big trend, and internet industry as a industry vertical in the Chinese economy, it just makes sense that the whole industry have very high growth as well. I think maybe China also started earlier. The oldest venture firm, good names venture firm in China, have been around for 20 years or more. So, and the early startups, some of them, they were, I think Alibaba, Tencent, they were founded easily around 15 years ago. So maybe the history is longer. And if you look at the top 10 wealthiest people in China, we have at least 2 or 3 people from the tech industry in the list. Enormous amount of wealth have been created. And coming along with this is that you have a huge pool of people who have made significant wealth. And these people become role models. And it just become a self-fulfilling cycle. That you see successful role models, and then that encourages more entrepreneurs to do startups, people with great ambition, and this continue to create great entrepreneurs. So over time, I think it's a virtuous cycle. I think maybe I'll just talk, that's my quick few minutes of introduction, and maybe we'll discuss further later on. Yeah.
Sure. My name is Hoyan Lee. I'm a managing director at Citi, spending a lot of time in the technology, media, and telecom space. I think just leveraging on what Vani and Tuck have been saying, I think you saw the stats, right? The economy, the size of the population is the same. There's a lot of similarities. I think a few things to think about as well, though, are the median age in India is actually lower than that of China, which means there's a lot of young people who are keen and ready and willing to use these types of newer services, online services, to do things. Mobile penetration also is lower, as we know, but there looks like there's disruption coming in the telecom industry in India, and that should pick up quite a lot. I think with that pickup, particularly as we look at China and how some of these players have scaled up, it's that a lot of these players were simply chasing user bases, right? These companies that you'd watch would keep pivoting, offering different services, but the goal was really a base of users. As Tuck was saying, perhaps it's a little easier to scale up in China given one language, targeting 1.4 billion people, most of whom have a cell phone. But that was really, really important. And as we saw mobile penetration go up, people were looking for ways to buy new services, fintech, healthcare, etc., shopping. They were looking for more efficient ways to do things, and suddenly it was there. Data was affordable, data packages were easy to understand, and there was a really big pickup. So I think as you watch these Chinese companies grow, they were very focused on user bases, and what was helpful again was one population you were targeting. I think one other thing that was also briefly touched on is just there's a lot of personalities in China, right? The people follow everything that these entrepreneurs have been saying, right? Be they the founders of Alibaba, Xiaomi, etc. There's a huge following that there's really cults of personality, and those have really helped to push products out. That again is also, as Tuck has said, developed role models for people, right? Entrepreneurship is alive and well. It's even encouraged by the government as they see it as a way to tackle inefficiencies in the state-owned system. And so we have seen a massive boom. Recently, though, I think now that smartphone penetration has basically peaked and growth has, some of these companies have really matured, what we're also seeing is an alignment amongst different ecosystems. Effectively, there are a few gateways to access a whole assortment of different services. And so now people are moving slightly away from purely user acquisition into, you know, a little more focus on how to make some money. And I guess, at least thinking here in India, given where things are, penetration for mobile phones is about to go up. There's a whole raft of new services. There's a huge number of entrepreneurs here. I guess there is an exciting time ahead where hopefully we again see this massive scaling of different giants across verticals.
So Tuck, in the last 1 year, you have made many trips to India and you've met many, many entrepreneurs and companies. And clearly, you have deep understanding and experience of China and Chinese entrepreneurs. So what was your impressions and takeaways in meeting these Indian companies and entrepreneurs, and how do you compare that in terms of similarities or differences from Chinese entrepreneurs?
Yeah, I actually like the entrepreneurs that I've seen in India very much. I think India has very talented engineers and product managers. And in a few instances, I think the products that they have designed or the technology they have developed is superior to what I've seen in China. So, and if you look at the globally, right, I think Chinese engineers and Indian engineers, they are equally talented. And if we look at the global perspective, the CEOs of global tech companies, they are Indians. So I think I'm actually very optimistic about the potential of Indian entrepreneurs. The limitations that I see is that the infrastructure is a limitation, and maybe bureaucracy is a limitation. So how fast or how big the overall mobile internet industry can grow in India, I think to a large extent is how we address these limitations. With regard to people, I think the Indian engineers or Indian founders, they are as good and talented as Chinese founders.
And Citi has been involved in many IPOs, of course globally, but we are talking in this context on China tech IPOs. And India has not had too many tech IPOs, right? So from your perspective, in order to create role models and sustainable companies, in order to create role models, you need sustainable companies. So what is your prognosis when you look across the landscape in India? Do you have a viewpoint on when that tipping point is going to happen? From what kind of tech sectors can India create that $50, $100 billion IPO? Is that 10 years away, 20 years away, 2 years away?
Yeah, this is a question I've been thinking about, because as you look over the course of the last 10 years, there's been a huge number of Chinese companies listing in the US. That really has been a trend. There was a little bit of a stalling, you know, during different periods for different reasons. But again, the IPO market has rewarmed. We've seen IPOs from companies like Gridsum, there's GDS, which is on the road. And it's interesting because there really aren't that many Indian companies who have chosen to do that. I think it's a few things. One is, at least for these Chinese entrepreneurs, listing in the US has been a goal. It may have been a goal for 10, 15 years, whatever the length of time is. It's really people see it as a branding event. People see it as a point of pride. It has been something that people have been focused on for a very long time. It's also a way, of course, for them to get liquidity. There has been some debate for a lot of these entrepreneurs, do I go public in the Chinese market where we're seeing, you know, sky-high valuations? Or do we go public in the US markets where we're seeing high but not as high valuations? We are still seeing a lot of Chinese entrepreneurs choose the US markets, largely because in the US people are willing to value off revenue, for example. People are not necessarily as focused on a net income number. And so there are certain companies that still choose to go to the US. I think It has been very beneficial for the Chinese ecosystem to see that people have their names, listed in the newspapers. The media quotes them very often. You always have pictures of people going to NASDAQ and the NYSE when the day their stock lists. These type of things really, encourage people to start companies. There was a movie about one of the education companies that listed in the U.S. It's a Chinese movie about the founders, listing in the U.S. And again, had a pretty big following. And so it's these type of examples, I think, that get people excited to go into startups where life is more unpredictable, but the rewards are large.
But you didn't answer my question about when is that happening for India? You guys have tons of primary, secondary research as a firm. You have an opinion on it. And so what is the limitation? What's stopping you from taking an Indian company public? Naveen, if he's here in Mobi, maybe ready, maybe there are lots of companies ready. So what's stopping you from taking Indian companies public?
I think there are a number of companies in India who are thinking of going public, right? They may not have gone there yet simply because sometimes it's to do with scale. If you look at China, a small company might have 50 million users. And so they have, in China, they've reached a certain scale, a certain level of revenue, which enables you to list in the US. I think we are starting to see that here in India, though. We have a few active mandates where we're talking to people about listing. These are companies that I think most people here would know, quite hot ones, but until now may not have had the sufficient scale. So the ideas were very interesting, the business was interesting, but you do need a certain scale to list in the US.
Great. And Chuck, one thought that I had was, when you think about the successful companies in China or successful companies to come, what kind of entrepreneurs and what kind of traits do you think is creating that? And maybe there is something to learn, glean from that and apply that to Indian entrepreneurs also, because there are, like in India, in China too, I'm sure people who have gone to Harvard or worked in a global company and come back and they're starting, and there may be others who maybe don't speak English. So is there, what have you seen and who's driving this massive success? Is there anything to derive from that? And some of that maybe also applies for us here in India in reflecting on where is generation of entrepreneurs coming from?
Sure. I think when I first, in the first few years, I was in China in the maybe at least more than 10 years ago. One of the deepest impression I had was I saw a few Chinese entrepreneurs who were extremely hungry and extremely ambitious, I was really impressed. They were like, you feel like they were out there wanting to conquer the world. And at the same time, I think a few of the most successful entrepreneurs I've seen, besides being very ambitious, they are at the same time very down to earth, ready to get their hands dirty to get things done. So for us, when we look at entrepreneurs, we're looking for ambitious people, highly driven, highly motivated, deep conviction about what they wanted to do, and at the same time humble enough to know that they cannot know everything, and they are constantly learning. So ambitious, humble, driven, hands-on, these are a few criteria that we hope to look in entrepreneurs.
And in one of the challenges, probably, this is just my perception, is today from a global capital access, Chinese companies have had easier access to global capital, and I'm not talking about IPO yet, but whether it's mezzanine or growth capital. And in India, there isn't significant domestic growth capital, and the pools of where that capital is going to come from has also been very limited sources. So what are your thoughts on, and after you get your Series A funding, most of the business models are fairly capital intensive. So what's your thoughts on where you see capital ease or difficulty for Indian companies?
Yeah, I think as you point out, if you look at the amount of VC investments in China versus India, the amount of VC money that goes into Chinese companies is multiples of what we see here, right? China benefits from trapped liquidity, it benefits from excess liquidity. There's lots of reasons, but there's a huge amount of capital there willing to fund ideas. I think as you will have seen in the last 1-2 years, there's hundreds of millions of US dollars put into startup car companies, for example. Hundreds of millions of dollars being put up into other startup ideas. And when I say startup car company, a prototype isn't ready yet, right? It's really an idea. And I think partly China just benefits from the massive amount of liquidity that is stuck in that country. It's very helpful to develop an ecosystem that way, because effectively, as you've seen, not just in China, but all over the world, VCs have basically funded consumers. And that amount of funding has helped to win a lot of users, right? We've seen it in the shared driver wars. We've seen it in food delivery wars. It has been very helpful to grow large giants who we have seen now start to consolidate against some of the larger players in China. I think here in India, it is more of a challenge, right? The numbers are definitely lower. It's a sizable number, but it just doesn't meet China's number, which is surprisingly not that far off from the US. I think, and maybe Tuck has some ideas on this in terms of how do you get more VC money here. I think it's really a matter of showing that there are success stories, right? Showing people that a lot of money can in fact be made so that people start to divert their assets into the VC class.
Yeah, so you are here from China and you're actively investing in India, and although you haven't made announcements on which companies, are you an outlier? Do you see more of this happening? What are your thoughts on sources of growth capital for Indian companies?
Sure. Maybe just to add on to what Ho Ying mentioned earlier. Actually, maybe about 10 years ago, back 10 years ago, when there were not many exits, there were not many venture capital firms or PE firms in China as well. My personal view is that the golden period as an investor in China is that maybe from the year 2004 to 2007, in which we could cherry pick very high quality companies and go in at very attractive valuation. But since 2008, there has been an abundance of capital, and I think today in China there's too much capital in the market. And why is there so much capital in the market from 2008? I think to a large extent is that the investors and entrepreneurs see successful startups being listed and exit at very good valuation. And this creates a virtuous cycle of international investors and local investors pumping more money into the venture and PE space, and more entrepreneurs wanting to come out to do startups. So I think for India, maybe an important stimulus is that in the next few years, for some of the Indian unicorns to be listed and make investors a lot of money, make their founders and employees a lot of money, and then this will start a virtuous cycle. And I'm sure there will be more capital coming into the market and more founders coming out with interesting ideas.
I mean, do you have any favorite themes in India which can achieve that kind of massive scale?
Yeah, so as Tuck was mentioning, look, there's infrastructure challenges and there's inefficiency challenges, and that's really where the opportunity lies, right? That's what we've seen in China and elsewhere across the globe. Those are the building blocks for real successful online companies. And so I think similar to other geographies, right, we're going to see fintech, healthcare, shopping services, et cetera. All these services are going to, it's a big population here, it's a big market, there's a rising income level. For sure, these will all be big markets, right? And in places where we see more inefficiency, I think the opportunity is even larger. That's why as you look at China, for example, with these state-owned banks, which are slow, bureaucratic, et cetera, we've seen a whole wealth of, a whole range of different products, right? From insurance, life insurance, non-life insurance, savings products, investment products, et cetera, right? The more inefficient, actually, the bigger the opportunity. And I think many of these opportunities exist in a lot of economies, such as India as well.
Doug, what are your favorite, as in the last year since you've been studying India, what are your favorite themes for macro, broad themes for growth in India? And along with that, are there any particular business model differences that you see in opportunities in India?
I wouldn't claim to truly understand India yet. I think my advantage is that having invested in China for the past close to 15 years, I have seen business models that have worked and not worked in China. And if I see similar business model in India, I will have a better sense of about the challenges and the opportunities in each business model. For us, we at this moment we are focusing on looking at business models that we understand in China, and for now, I think based on what I have seen, we like business models that touches less the offline elements as much as possible. At this point, I think the more a product that are purely built on a mobile internet platform is easier to proliferate. If it touches on the offline elements with the current infrastructure, I think it may take a longer time and more capital to get a business model proven. Yeah.
That may be counter to what many companies want to do today. Whether they'll succeed or not, we don't know. But the big buzzword every entrepreneur comes and talks about is omni-channel. So it's a whole different discussion on whether that will work or not. Actually, on that, do you have an opinion on whether India needs omni-channel or pure online models?
I think if you look at a lot of the Chinese businesses, right, for example, the classified businesses that did list a few years ago in the US, despite the fact they were online businesses, they actually had thousands of people with clipboards going door to door, business to business, trying to sign people up. More recently, I think you've seen a lot of acquisitions of online players onto offline channels, right, as they develop their online to offline models. I actually do think the offline business is quite important, right? In reality, it helps for certain verticals. It helps a lot with distribution. It helps with presence. It helps with your brand name. So despite having an online presence, sometimes you still need that offline system, be it to sign up new customers, be it to sell your product. We've seen that for different things, mobile phones, et cetera. I think in China, that has been an experience. In India, as Tuck is saying, it's maybe not as easy, but I still think it is an important element because some people still like to feel in touch what they're buying.
So one last question for you. What do you think should be the metrics that an Indian entrepreneur should consider if they say, I have an ambition to list in US? What is it that you would advise them? I want to list in NASDAQ. I want to have a massive success. What is the scale? What should an Indian company be prepared to be able to list?
Yeah, so in the US, there are different metrics. There's obviously financial metrics, right? You need to be of a certain size. I would say, as you think about each sector, the valuations are different. Sometimes you do on revenue, sometimes EBITDA, sometimes net income. But in the US, you're targeting really a $500 million market cap at least, so that you have sufficient liquidity and the ability for large funds to follow and invest in you. Anything below is a little more challenging for these big funds. So 500 million is kind of a baseline number. I think the other thing to think about is, of course, business models, right? I think in the last talk we heard about, advertising, which in the US is, as was referenced, a tougher model at this point, though some deals are being done. We are seeing a lot of interest in the software space, the SaaS space. There's a lot of excitement there. But I think what's really interesting and exciting about listing in the US is if you can position a unique story and get people excited, people will buy into it. So despite the fact there may be some negative clouds amongst certain verticals, if you have a differentiated story, be it the ability for someone to invest in India, an India growth story, for example, that can really excite US investors.
Doug, lastly, why are you personally so interested in India?
Well, personally...
Food, the people...
Yes, no, personally, personally, since I was very young, I was actually very intrigued by India. So I always wanted to make the trip, but never convinced someone to come with me. So, but anyway, just I am actually very interested because I think it's a huge country with huge potential, very talented people, but there are obviously challenges as well. As an investor in India, I think my personal view is that it has to be very long term. We have to be patient. If we are looking for quick money, then India may not be the best choice for me right now. So I am personally interested to hopefully that the companies that I invest in 5 to 10 years time, they become a unicorn. And I think when I retire, I would like to say that, to brag that I backed them in their early days. So that is my self-interest.
And for all the entrepreneurs in the audience, Tuck has been coming about once a quarter, and he keeps a killer schedule of meeting a lot of entrepreneurs, listening to a lot of companies. So please send your IM to him and schedule for appointment in the next visit, or heck, this visit, I don't know. And I'm sure Sangeeta can share your email address, right? So I know that we said we will take 1 or 2 audience questions. I don't know how easy or difficult that is from asking a question, but if somebody has a question, please, raise your hand. There is a lady over there, and like I said, we have time for 2 questions. So 1 over there and 1 from here, that gentleman in the blue. So that's.
Good evening, and thank you for a very insightful discussion. My question is about Uber, which has been an aggressive and audacious company, you might say, in many parts of the world. But in China, it actually, sold to Didi and had to exit, or chose to exit. Can you throw some light on this? Is it a cultural thing? Is it a business thing? What is it?
I think, generally speaking, China, being a very big country and with a lot of regional differences, is a very complex market to operate in. So not just Uber, I think many US internet companies that have ventured into China, they have not been as successful as they are as in the US or outside of the US. Uber, personally, I think they've actually done quite well, very well in China, actually above my expectation, to be honest. So I think Uber has done a great job in China, and but they have a very strong competitor, Didi, and I think the outcome of the merger of the 2 companies, the China operation of Uber and Didi, I think is the best outcome for both companies and for investors. So I think for everyone, including founders and investors, we fight for our best interests, but at the end of the day, what we need to sort for is a win-win situation for everyone. So I think the current outcome is the best outcome for everyone.
Wayne, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I agree. I think, look, Uber has done very well in China. They've obviously chosen the merger route. The reality is, from their perspective, as you're well aware, they have global ambitions, right? They have other things to focus on globally as well. China being a key market.
Like India?
Like India. Like autonomous driving. Like there's a lot of things they're working on, right? So the question is, do you want to battle it out in the Chinese market, which is a tough and very well-funded market?
So do you predict that they'll merge with Ola also?
You may know better.
Bhavish may know better, but there was one last question here as we wrap up.
Hi, Tak. This is Akash. My question for you is, what metrics are you looking for the early stage startups, when you evaluate them in India? So what
if you were to write a check for his company, what are you looking for?
So I mentioned earlier about the qualities of the founders that we look for. We look for great founders, and we look for whether the business model is in the leveraging on a big trend. Our name is very much into our DNA and in every deal that we see. and maybe to reiterate, Shunwei means leveraging on a big trend to achieve greatness. So I think for investors and for founders of startups, we have to think about whatever we do, are we in the right direction? Are we leveraging the big trend? And if we back the right founders, then there's a potential for these companies to become great companies.
Chuck, would you give an example? Because otherwise it's hard to visualize what that is, either in India or China, but if you can in India, among all that you have seen, what is a big trend? Just as an example, right?
Sure. Yeah, I guess the company that is most closely associated with us, Xiaomi, that's clearly a very big trend. Smartphone, when Xiaomi was founded, China was transitioning from feature phone to smartphone. That's a huge, big trend. And then at the founding of the company, we decided that the model would be built on direct sales. And because in the long run, the smartphone industry will be similar to the PC industry. Hardware is going to be commoditized. So eventually, at the long run, we want to build a business model that is based on the internet and using hardware just as a platform. And the founding team of Xiaomi, I think these were all very experienced and great entrepreneurs.
Great. Thank you so much. I know coming to India, nothing was easy about coming to India. Huyen ended up at the wrong Taj Vivanta, and we apologize for all the visa problems you had. He was denied visa 4 times coming to India. And with all of that, we really appreciate the time you have taken to travel the distance to come and be here with you. Thank you so much.
Help him to push the chairs back.